Good evening, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We appreciate it. Thanks to Brookline Interactive Group for recording this event. It's going to be available, I think, on Friday. They'll get that done as soon as they can. It'll be available for streaming. And thank you to the presenters tonight for their commitment to these important issues and to our town, of course. I'm Dan Saltzman, and along with Linda Roseman, we're the co-chairs of the nonpartisan Brookline Neighborhood Alliance. Formed over 20 years ago, the BNA is an umbrella organization for Brookline's various neighborhood associations. We're sort of a glue that holds the various organizations together. We facilitate communications between the neighborhood associations, and we facilitate communications with the town. And we hold events like this one. We host candidate nights sometimes, and we've done special events on various articles of interest to neighborhoods. And then, like what we're doing tonight, a warrant article review. Sometimes we partner with other organizations like the League of Women Voters of Brookline and the Town Meeting Members Association, and then sometimes we do things by ourselves, which is what's happening tonight. Our focus is on what affects Brookline's neighborhoods. That's what we're all about. I live in White Place. That's the White Place Neighborhood Association. It's kind of a suburb of Emerson Garden Neighborhood Association. And I consider myself a resident of both of those neighborhoods. And my kids, who are now teenagers, they don't know it, but I think they love their neighborhood just as much as I do. Neighborhoods are a really important part of the identity of our town, and I think it's an important part of our own identities. So what affects our neighborhoods really affects all of us. And the BNA's goal is to inform residents on the variety of important issues that affect our neighborhoods. The only thing better than a wonderful, cohesive neighborhood is a wonderful, cohesive, well-informed neighborhood. So tonight we expect to inform residents on the impact of 3 warrant articles. It's 3 issues that affect our environment: magnificent trees, beautiful dark skies, and protecting raptors. As always, we have an impressive crew of residents, elected folks, and town employees who are here to speak to these warrant articles. And we're lucky, really, to have these types of people available to us that take their time to come and present as they are going to tonight. We wholeheartedly thank them for taking that time out. That said, the format for the evening is going to be 10 minutes for each presentation, and that time is going to be shared by the various presenters. And then we'll follow that up with questions and answers. Linda's going to be circulating a clipboard, and you can sign up to speak.
Somebody send us your notice for this particular question time.
And then at the end, after we've done all 3 articles, with whatever time is remaining, we can open up again for questions about anything. The format tonight is informational. It's not a debate. Any relevant questions are great, and honestly, pointed but polite questions are fine. We'll emphasize polite, of course. So again, Linda's going to be running the Q&A. And with that said, I just want to thank you again for coming out. I want to thank the presenters, and we're going to get started with Warrant Article 12. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. It's unusual. So my name is Ira Krepchen, and I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 15 and a retired mechanical engineer. And at one time, I was known as the lighting guy. So the reason for that is I worked with electric utilities and helped them try to understand the new lighting technologies that were coming into play when LEDs started to really take off. And I also spent a little time as a volunteer in Newton with the Energy Commission working on spreading the word about lighting technologies there as well. So the subject of Warrant Article 12 is outdoor lighting in Brookline, and it's a topic not well covered in town bylaws at this point. Yet new technologies and growing concerns about the impact of outdoor lighting on our health and ecology make this an ideal time to jump in. According to the nonprofit Dark Sky International, more than 50 Massachusetts cities and towns have passed some kind of outdoor regulation. And here in Brookline, the effort has been spurred in part by residents' reports of uncomfortable glare and light trespass from streetlights and other outdoor lighting situations. And that covers both the most densely populated parts of our town and the least densely populated parts of our town as well. It's a town-wide issue. And the potential benefits are great for the world and for Brookline. Researchers have found that sky glow mars the night sky for 99% of U.S. and European residents, and 80% of all the people in the world. And in our town, Coolidge Corner sky glow is said to be similar to that of downtown Boston or Manhattan. So it's a big deal. And this light pollution does more than ruin the view as a source of wonder and awe and create challenges for astronomers. The effects of outdoor lighting include ecological, human health, public safety, and climate change. The ecological impacts most commonly cited are the millions of migratory birds thrown off course each year, and sea turtles who are drawn off course by stray light that diverts them from the path where they go to reproduce. Outdoor lighting can also alter pollination processes and could provide advantages to invasive species. It's just a lot going on there. And in human health, insomnia is the most well-known effect of certain light types on humans. It can result from the disturbance of circadian rhythms by nighttime exposure to blue wavelengths. And widespread insomnia poses a threat to both public health and worker safety and productivity. And most recently, there was an article in The Guardian about how lighting at night can actually increase the likelihood of getting Alzheimer's disease, especially for people under 65. So it's hard to prove something like that, but there's definitely an association. Public safety, the most obvious culprit is glare. Many people believe the brighter the light, the safer an area will be. But research shows that it's not that simple, and safety will depend on a number of factors. Just one example, very bright spotlights may create dark shadows where would-be intruders can hide until the moment of truth arrives. So energy and climate change is also interesting. LEDs can be very efficient, but there are signs of what economists call a rebound effect, where wider use of LED lighting, thanks to its efficiency and decreasing costs and longevity, more people are using it for things that they previously would not have illuminated. So instead of saving energy, there's the potential for losing energy or using more energy. The good news is that smart use of LED technology, including taking advantage of all the control capabilities, can lead to lasting energy savings and mitigate the other dangers that outdoor lighting poses. And there are resources and organizations out there that can help municipalities deal with these issues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ira. That was a great introduction to this very important topic. I'm Nicole Prey. For those who don't know me, I work in the regulatory division of the Planning and Community Development Department. The department is proposing a new regulation under the zoning bylaw in response to resident complaints about glare and light trespass. This new section would provide the building commissioner with accessible, measurable standards to make enforcement easier. As Ira mentioned, it's come to our attention that our current bylaw doesn't do enough to address these issues. And staff feels that these regulations establish clear, easy to digest, yet practical standards as a good starting point for enforceability. Next slide, please. In developing these standards, staff relied on the definitive standards by the Illuminating Engineering Society that you see here. We also relied on community member input, other municipal regulations, and we had an expert in town, Jennifer Pizak, who's a lighting design professional and Brookline resident. So you can see that the 5 key principles that they established for good lighting design are that it's useful, targeted, no brighter than necessary, only used when necessary, and utilizing warmer temperatures when possible. The standards that we're proposing, you can do next slide, please. The key regulations are going to apply only in residential districts. We thought that this would be a good starting point to establish possible commercial district regulations and mixed-use district regulations down the line. We also already have Harvard Street form-based zoning code regulations for lighting, so those are covered separately in the Harvard Street form-based code. So this new section would provide some key standards, including that luminaires shall be fully shielded, the color temperature shall be no more than 3,000 kelvins. I apologize for the third line, that should have been removed. We actually proposed to remove that and put the 2 bullets you see there, no light trespass under 5 feet, and the hours would be removed per select board recommendation. So I can answer any questions, but there would be certain floodlight restrictions, and then local historic districts would have their own review. So the hours are not part of what we're suggesting, and also the light trespass. I apologize, this is an older presentation, it's changed many times. You can do next slide. So these are just some photographic examples of what fully shielded would look like. You can see the top photo there would be partially shielded, which would not be allowed. Only in certain instances would partially or unshielded be allowed, such as entrances and exits of homes. Next slide, please. And then this is a good example of what a warm color spectrum would be. You can see the first 3 colors on the top photo there. Those would be the warmer color temperatures, less than 3,000 kelvins. Next. These are just some examples of the variety of different shielded versus unshielded lights that would be acceptable under this new bylaw. And then the advisory board recommended referring this back to planning department for consideration of a companion bylaw. There were certain parts of the bylaw which have now been removed based on the select board recommendation, and I believe this is going to go back to advisory committee, but Jocelyn can give a little update on that if you'd like. Next. The planning board recommended favorable action at their October 10th meeting. They had a recommendation that the fully shielded definition include dark skies certified, which staff agrees. That's a good example. And they also had concern that the word entry and back entrance should be main entrance. Next. Select board voted favorable action, but they actually changed to remove 2 sections, which were those hours that I was discussing, and then removing glare from the purpose. And that was at last night's meeting. And I think that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. So we're going to take 3 questions, and coincidentally, only 3 people signed up to ask questions, so that works out perfectly. And then at the end of the program, if people have additional questions they'd like to ask of any of the panelists, they can do so. So the first person on my list is Garrett Peterson. If you want to come up and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Garrett Peterson, and I live in the North Brookline neighborhood. Thank you for your very helpful presentation, and I agree with everything you've said here. I think this is a very important warrant. And the fact that in terms of efficiency, I don't think it matters what sort of lighting you're using, whether it's LED or sodium vapor or fluorescent or incandescent. If we're lighting the sky, that's inefficient. That's a waste of energy right there. But my question is a little broader, and Nicole, I think you've touched on it a little bit with some of the changes that have occurred here, but you know, rules, laws are only as good as they are enforceable.
Mm-hmm.
And in Massachusetts, unfortunately, speaking as a boy from the Midwest, we don't have much of an enforcement culture. We love to pass laws, but we don't have much of an enforcement culture. So laws, rules are only as good as they are enforceable. So I'm curious about what sort of an enforcement regimen is going to be built into this, particularly given the town's very limited resources. Some of these parts of this has been taken out, I see, specifically because of that enforceability issue.
Yeah, I can try to answer that. So the building department would be the enforcer for anything in the zoning bylaw. As far as enforcing this retroactively, I think that's kind of what you were getting at. It's my understanding that there will be a general bylaw that will be kind of a companion to this zoning bylaw that would be proposed for the next spring town meeting. But the building department would be the enforcer for this bylaw.
Thank you. That was a good question. Deed Cody is next on the list. I just forgot to preface this with saying nobody's done this yet, but not to cut up and make a speech. we don't, at this venue, necessarily want to hear whether you are in favor or against the article, but to please ask a question. Thanks. Can I ask from here? Oh, sure, if you'd rather. Go ahead. Sure.
So, my question is, I'm curious about neighboring towns, cities. Do they have similar regulations that have already been passed?
Yes, so we took a look at a few different ones. We looked at Cambridge, we looked at Somerville. They all have, and Newton, they all have similar kind of lighting bylaws. Some of them go a little bit more into detail. So we kind of kept this simple, but we did pull from those other municipalities.
So I'm told that for the sake of the recording, we do need people to come to the microphone. So I just would like to say that the question was, do other municipalities have similar bylaws? And Elisa Plazon-Chef is next. Sorry if I murdered your name.
So Derek partially stole my question, which was going to be about enforcement. But I guess my question is, given that, so I'm very excited that town is taking this on, but the current bylaw appears to only address a small portion of the issue. So where there's, I think, general agreement that we really need to address this more broadly through a general bylaw, what's the process for getting that going? Is that going to be initiated by the planning department? Or, yes?
No, I actually believe that's going to be a community-led effort.
Okay.
So if people have additional questions later, they're welcome to ask them at the end. So we'll have our next presenters.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll pass around the board.
Are you going to sit here? Yes. Just, I'm going to hit the buttons, just tell me when to advance.
Okay, we go fast. Should we dive in?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Olivia Fisher-Fox, and I'm co-coordinator of the Brookline Mothers Out Front Tree Team, board member for Brookline Green Space Alliance, and resident of Precinct 4. Warrant Article 16 is about protecting and growing our tree canopy, the resource that will help us through extreme heat, heavy rains, and rising carbon levels, just to name a few benefits. We'd like to tell you why we created this warrant article, what it does, how it works, and why we need your support. Next slide, please. Globally, we just had the hottest summer on record. In Brookline, we had 34 days above 90 degrees, 4 heat waves, and 3 heat emergencies. The heat island effect is getting worse. Stronger storms are causing more flooding, and we're losing our tree canopy. Next slide, please. And it's our tree canopy that protects us from climate change by providing shade, cooling, carbon capture, and absorbing stormwater. Did you know that the temperature under a tree can be 20 to 45 degrees cooler? That trees can reduce ambient air temperature by 2 to 9 degrees? That our tree canopy diverts 49 million gallons of stormwater annually? Next slide, please. And yet, we are losing an average of 12 acres of tree canopy per year. Just to keep pace, we'd need to plant 700 trees a year. But the town is only planting 350 to 400, half of what we need. The cost of closing that gap would be $450,000 to $525,000 per year. But more so, we don't have enough space on public land to compensate for all the tree removals on private land. This is why we need to better protect trees on private property, which is 68% of our land area. Next slide, please. Now what? Article 16 acts on the recommendation in the Urban Forest Climate Resiliency Master Plan that we increase protection and planting on private land. It prioritizes public health and climate resiliency and seeks to balance individual property benefits against costs to the community. Briefly, if you take down a healthy tree, you undermine the town's climate resiliency. For this reason, Article 16 would require a permit to remove any tree that is 6 inches in diameter or larger, and require mitigation proportional to the loss of the benefits that tree provided, while providing exemptions for a range of circumstances, including trees that are dead, dying, diseased, unviable, hazardous, damaged by natural disaster, or crowding out other trees. Owners whose income is at or below 80% AMI, 100% affordable housing projects, and solar energy installation. Next slide, please. So why are we increasing the mitigation? Because the larger the tree, the greater the loss. Large trees are climate rock stars. Each group of trees pictured here stores the same amount of carbon. For instance, one mature red oak tree, 54 inches in diameter, stores 8 tons of carbon. In order to pull the equivalent amount of carbon out of the atmosphere from smaller trees, you would need 465 trees at 4 inches DBH diameter. That's the group of smallest trees on the right and are the size commonly used for planting. Next slide, please. In our current bylaw, you replant 1/2 inch for every 1 inch of tree diameter you remove, or pay $500 per inch into the tree fund. Under our proposal, the amount you need to replant is based on Newton's formula, with payment into the tree fund set at $500 per inch not replanted. As you can see, based on the data from Cambridge, 75% of trees removed are likely to be in the first tier. Next slide, please. Now, how large are the largest trees coming down in Brookline? Since we do not have that data, we looked to the 5 years' worth of data available from Cambridge, where the median size of trees removed was 18 inches in diameter. Under the limited triggers of our current bylaw, that healthy tree would require 9 inches of replanting, or a little more than 2 landscape trees, boxed out in red, with the option to instead pay into the tree fund. Next slide, please. Our proposed mitigation would require replacing a healthy 18-inch diameter tree with the same 18 inches, or 4.5 4-inch diameter replacement trees boxed out in red, with a choice of paying into the tree fund. The tree fund, by the way, is the town's fund to plant and maintain trees in other parts of town to offset those lost on private property. As you can see, even under our proposal, replanting comes nowhere near to replacing the tree the town just lost. So this amendment asks that you consider taking just a small step toward increasing the mitigation for healthy trees lost in town. And I say town because the urban canopy provides climate resiliency to all of us, whether it is on private, public, or commercial land. Now I'm going to hand it over to Catherine.
Hello, I'm Catherine Donaher. I'm a longtime resident of Precinct 2, a retired president of CDA Planning and Development, and I participated in many development review committees in Brookline, and I'm now sitting on the Forms of Government committee set up by the moderator. Next slide, please. Our permit process is modeled after those in Cambridge and Newton. So if you take down a tree greater than 6 inches in diameter, this is the process you'll follow. Fill out an application with the relevant information about your tree, which may include an arborist certification on the condition of the tree. Many tree removal companies will provide this at no cost if you use them for the removal. If you're exempt, no further action is needed. You go ahead and remove your tree. If you're not exempt, then you'll check with the DPW's reviewing agent on required mitigation. That could be planting replacement trees, contributing to the tree fund, or a combination of the two. Then you can go ahead and remove your tree under the conditions established in the mitigation plan. Next slide, please. You're probably all wondering how much this program will cost. DPW estimates the cost of the program, when fully operational, to be about $290,000 per year. We, the petitioners, use data from Cambridge's experience to model 18 cost-revenue scenarios under many different assumptions. They show that the program, properly enforced, could generate the revenue to be self-funding, as it has elsewhere. In simple terms, it should pay for itself. Next slide, please. But what about the cost of not protecting our canopy? Let's look at just some of the many ways that tree protection benefits us. For little money, we can preserve these remarkable benefits for the future. Protection from flooding, shade to reduce heat islands, thank you, cleaner air with less ozone, habitat, biodiversity, environmental justice. It's really all about the quality of life in Brookline. These benefits far outweigh the costs. They are priceless. Next slide, please. Climate change is a global existential threat, but our tree canopy plays a major role in protecting us here where we live. The truth is, when individuals cut down trees, they impose a cost on all of us. They take away the oxygen we breathe, the shade we need, and they make our town less viable. Our predecessors left us a magnificent gift in the tree canopy that protects us today. We hope that you will, by voting for this warrant article, you can leave your own legacy of tree to every person in Brookline today and to your children and grandchildren. I hope you will support Article 16. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got 2 people signed up. The first is Sybil Centers.
Well, my question has to do with enforcement of this as well. So follow up on Garrett's and the other lady's question.
This is a complaint-driven bylaw, like so many in town. And that's part of the reason that the permitting process requires that you let your neighbors know if you're going to take a tree down. And that will hopefully begin the dialogue. And if you see a tree coming down and you didn't get told about it, then you know the permit wasn't pulled. So that was the thinking behind.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a question.
Yeah.
Who enforces that? Who is the enforcement agency for that?
So that would be DPW.
The DPW.
Yeah.
Thank you. Garrett, you have another question? Come on up.
Actually, I have 2 questions now. And one is the follow-on to the question that was just asked about enforcement. If it's complaint-driven, what is the plan for educating property owners about this if it's passed?
If it's passed, we do a big educational campaign in town.
And do we have a budget for that?
Well, I can tell you, as Mothers Out Front members, we're pretty good at getting the message out using. So we would start there, and then use all the news outlets that we can, Brookline.news, et cetera.
The other thing too is we have a lot of property turnover, particularly in North Brookline where I live.
Mm-hmm.
So it's never going to be a one and done thing either. And should probably be part of a package that new property owners receive from the town of important things they need to know. And trash, so disposal and recycling, and trees. Mm-hmm. My second question has to do with new development, which we're going to be seeing a lot of in North Brookline, particularly under the MBTA Communities Act. And how does this apply to developers and sites that are being redeveloped? Particularly an existing structure has been developed, and typically a developer will come in and they'll just clear cut all the trees on the property.
Yep, they will. So we do have a bylaw in place now that is triggered by large construction projects. So if I understand correctly, you're probably thinking about North Brookline, which is, most lots are built already, and so that requires tearing down a building and then building more. So that is currently protected by our current tree bylaw, and the mitigation stays the same, essentially, the payment per inch, et cetera.
Thanks. Diana McClure has a question.
I'd like to know if we can have your slides immediately, maybe distributed by BNA, because I would like to be able to contact my town meeting members to tell them,
Yeah.
yes, vote on such and such, but I want to use some of your factual information when I write.
Absolutely. And I'll just say that most of the facts here come from the Urban Forest Climate Resiliency Master Plan. But happy to share, Diana.
Okay, yeah, do you have a question? Come on up, Richard.
So, Richard Murphy, town meeting member in 16. So, myself along with some other people back in 2015, we came across a construction where they had clear cut, and it kind of triggered the long journey to really to where we are now. So a couple of years ago, we passed a tree bylaw around construction. This will now add more value across town. But the one thing that came out of a lot of discussions that we had about enforcement was that you need tree companies in order to do that. And Tom Brady is very much in control and basically just will inform all these tree companies that would do tree work in this town of the regulations. So the tree companies will know that they need to be able to have a permit if this goes forward as it should. And that will be one good piece of enforcement behind this bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we're ready for Article 18. Come on up.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jocelyn Murphy. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 16 and one of 15 petitioners from 11 precincts in Brookline seeking home rule authority to prohibit or restrict the use of second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides, or SGARs, on private property in Brookline. SGARs are a potent class of rodent poisons that were introduced after rodents developed a resistance to earlier poisons. They bioaccumulate in the bodies of their victims and prevent their blood from clotting, whether the victim is the targeted animal or the non-targeted eagle, hawk, owl, fox, coyote, or other predator that consumes the poisoned rodent, causing both to suffer massive internal bleeding, organ failure, paralysis, and an excruciating death. Next slide, please. I became aware of the devastating effects of SGARs when I heard the story of MK, this majestic bald eagle who nested in the Mystic Lakes watershed with her mate for several years. In early 2023, MK was found on the ground, lethargic and unable to fly. Next slide, please. MK was brought to a wildlife center for treatment. However, she died the next day from internal hemorrhaging caused by anticoagulant poisoning, confirmed by necropsy. The irony of MK's death is that she herself was a skilled rodent predator, and it was rodenticide that caused her to be unable to get off the ground by the time rescuers arrived. Next slide, please. Untold numbers of raptors and other wildlife are killed by SGARs every year. These dead and dying hawks and owl were photographed in Brookline. In a study of 94 birds of prey admitted to the Tufts Wildlife Clinic between 2012 and 2016, 96% tested positive for SGARs. In a follow-up study, 100% of the 43 red-tailed hawks admitted to the clinic between 2017 and 2019 tested positive for anticoagulant rodenticides, and 91% of these birds tested positive for 2 or more types of SGAR. Next slide, please. This is a juvenile hawk that was recovered by a town meeting member in his yard that was dying. He did his best to support the hawk, but was unsuccessful. Next slide, please. Mammals who consume rodents are also victims of anticoagulant poisoning in Massachusetts. The New England Wildlife Center reports treating an average of 50 cases of suspected anticoagulant poisoning each year, And this fox is one of 65 that have been treated at another Massachusetts Wildlife Center within the past 2 years. But anticoagulant rodenticides harm people and companion animals as well. The American Association of Poison Control Centers reported that more than 3,000 people per year were exposed to anticoagulant rodenticides between 2018 and 2022. In Massachusetts alone, there have been nearly 200 cases of anticoagulant rodenticide exposures within the past 3 years, with nearly half of these exposures occurring among children under the age of 6. Black, Indigenous, and people of color, particularly children, are disproportionately impacted by pesticides, including rodenticides, because of their exposure to these poisons in urban housing and sometimes at school. According to the ASPCA's Animal Poison Control Center, rodenticides have consistently ranked among the top 10 pet toxins within the past decade. Local veterinarians have reported that dogs and cats are frequently poisoned. Next slide, please. Despite these statistics, bait boxes like this one on Brookline Housing Authority property are located next to Brookline supermarkets, restaurants, and apartment buildings, and the rodenticide industry is booming. In 2022, commercial pesticide applicators in Massachusetts reported using over 559,000 pounds of rodenticides, 96% of which were anticoagulant rodenticides. It is evident that eschars are not effectively reducing rodent populations in the long term, and yet they are killing the wildlife that prey on rodents in staggering numbers. Because these poisons are ineffectively regulated by the state, Warrant Article 18 seeks legislative authority to regulate the use of eschars on private property in a manner to be determined in a future bylaw approved by town meeting. Last year, Health Director Reese, DPW Commissioner Shute, and Public Buildings Commissioner Charlie Simmons approved a policy prohibiting eschars on town property. Now we need legislative authority to restrict their use on private property. Next slide, please. The data from Brookline's rodent complaint tracker shows that eschars are not effectively controlling the rodent population. According to this data, shown in the blue line, rodent sightings have increased since 2023. Next slide, please. And so the next question is, what are the alternatives to rodenticide? This is Fran Perler's part of the presentation. However, she couldn't be here, so I'll do my best to represent what she would have said. Integrated Pest Control, or IPM, has been endorsed by the Health Department and by rodent control experts as a best practice. IPM promotes trash control, rodent exclusion, targeted trapping, and only when absolutely necessary, poisons that are the least harmful to non-targeted species. Next slide, please. Our neighbors in Newton promote and execute IPM as well. Their public building commissioner reported a 40% reduction in the rodent population using humane rodent contraception. Next slide, please. In conclusion, this is a listless barred owl that was recovered from a Brookline porch last month and taken to Tufts Wildlife Center, only to die shortly thereafter from suspected anticoagulant poisoning. We respectfully ask that you join Mass Audubon, the MSPCA, the Charles River Watershed Association, the Sierra Club, the Brookline Bird Club, Climate Action Brookline, and the Friends of Brookline Raptors by supporting the Home Rule petition that is called for under Warrant Article 18. Next slide, please. The petitioners of Article 18 have received enthusiastic commitments from Senator Cream and Representatives Balzer and McGregor, as well as Representative Vitolo, to support the Home Rule petition called for in Article 18 once it is approved by town meeting. Because Newton, Arlington, and Newbury have already filed similar Home Rule petitions with more communities expected to follow, the passage of this petition is not expected to require additional significant resources, and more importantly, it will encourage the state legislature to take action on a statewide basis, which is the petitioner's overarching goal. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Kathy Jansen, a co-founder of the Friends of Brookline Raptors.
My name is Kathy Jansen. I live at 10 City View Road, and I'm a founding member of the Friends of Brookline Raptors, which is a small grassroots organization working to restrict the use of eschars. I am here in support of Warrant Article 18. Jocelyn did a great job of giving you the statistics, talking about the dangers of this. What I would like to do is talk to you about the impact that this has had on me and my neighbors. I've moved to Brookline 26 years ago, and in the small patch of trees behind my house, there have always been 3 to 4 hawks that were living, nesting, raising their young, and keeping the balance of the small critters in check. Then a few homes across the street put out rat bait boxes with eschars. And the assisted living around the corner has boxes every 10 to 12 feet around every single building. All the hawks have died, and the critters are out of control, decimating our yards and gardens. This summer, for the first time in my 26 years here, we have rats trying to nest under our front porch and romping through our yard and in our street. You cannot have a conversation with anyone in this part of Brookline who has a yard without talking about the proliferation of the rabbits and the damage that they are doing to the plants, flowers, and vegetable gardens. We need our birds of prey to be healthy. We need to fix the imbalance that humans have created. We need to manage the rat problem with safe, proven methods which only use poison as a very last resort. California has passed legislation nearly banning eschar use in 2020. It's time for Massachusetts to move in that direction. The first small step we can take is passing Warrant Article 18, which will allow Brookline to restrict the use of eschars not only on public property, which it currently does, but also on private property, which is what the Home Rule petition will give them the authority to do. Thank you.
Last slide, please.
Thank you so much. Are there questions about this from the audience? I don't have anybody who signed up. Come on up.
Right, how soon can we start?
Whenever you want me.
2 questions. First one, Kathy, are there any statistics from the results of that California law that you can share?
I know the statistics that I know about come from an organization called RATS. Raptors Are the Solution. And they have done research mostly in Ventura, California, and several other places where they, in one study, they actually brought in hawks and let them go free in one area, rat-infested area. Another area, they used eschars, 50% reduction compared to the eschar area in the area where they let the raptors go. There's also other research in California that simply by putting out things to attract raptors that you can decrease the rat population. Decrease the signs of infestation, decrease nesting signs, decrease street counts when they go out and count the rats. I have family in California. We go all the time into San Francisco and all sorts of cities. They have horrible problems with homelessness everywhere, but I have never in California seen a rat. When I go out my front door, if it's after dark, chances are I'm going to see a rat now.
I never saw rats until I moved to the Boston area. I actually lived in the city of Boston, and it was in the Back Bay. It was stunning.
Yeah.
The second question is really about the investment of time and resources. It's not to be, I don't mean to be critical of this effort, but neither rodents nor raptors respect town boundaries. I'm wondering if there's any thought to making this a statewide campaign, passing a state law banning these things as California has done.
That's a great question. So the trouble is the state is moving very slowly. The Mass Department of Agricultural Resources is responsible for sort of managing how rodenticides are followed in Massachusetts. They're very slow. They have an antiquated method of collecting data that has just recently been corrected. There is currently a pending statewide bill that is looking at eventually controlling rodenticides in Massachusetts. However, it's just asking for more data collection. And Newbury, Arlington, and Newton have filed home rule petitions. So the overarching goal is the more communities that file home rule petitions will more urgently let the legislature know that this is a critical issue, and hopefully we will get statewide legislation sooner rather than later.
The Sierra Club and Mass Audubon Society and a couple of the other groups that have really pushed all the communities, towns, and cities across Massachusetts to start with these grassroots organizations have moved to this strategy because they've been so frustrated by their inability to get the Massachusetts legislature to move on this or on any other environmental things. Apparently it's an issue across the board. So they've shifted gears, and currently there are 17 groups that are well-formed and working, and there are another 30 to 45 that are in formation stages and hopefully will move towards. And the Audubon Society was part of the Boston did a big rat meeting a couple months ago, and there's a real push to see if we could get Boston to ask for a home rule petition, because apparently Boston never asked for home rule petitions. But that really would probably tip the scales if we could get them to move in that direction.
Thank you very much. Other questions for these panelists? Are there questions for other presenters of the other articles before we wrap up? Yeah, come on up.
Hi, I'm Peggy Campion, and I had a question about my tree presenters regarding who will protect the tree fund as the money comes in to make sure no other departments sort of borrow, or you know how that goes. They get reallocated sometimes, and I'm a novice at town meeting functions, but it seems like a real concern in my mind.
I think I can answer that question.
Thank you.
Okay?
Yeah.
If I understood your question, you're worried about funds being diverted to another use? So the tree fund by statute, it was accepted by town meeting under a statute that only allows the monies within the tree fund to be used for the purposes for which the fund was established.
Other questions about any of the articles that we've heard? Okay, you want to wrap up?
I have one question.
Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question about the dark skies. I'm just curious if I'm lucky enough to spend a decent amount of time out in Wellfleet, and if any of you have been there at night, it's remarkable. It's fantastic. I'm wondering if we were to be able to implement any of these measures, like realistically, how dark could the skies be in Brookline? And so I guess I'm thinking realistically, and then what could we hope even beyond that?
Well, realistically, I don't think we're going to have great views of the Milky Way anytime soon. But we can certainly expect people to sleep better. We can expect wildlife to be grateful to the extent which that's possible. But in terms of dark skies, I think we'll be able to see more constellations than we can right now. You know, when I was a kid growing up, I grew up in the D.C. area, and the skies were pretty bad even back then. And it kind of frustrated my nascent interests in astronomy. So I wish there was a better answer. Things are getting worse in general. And the only way to reverse that, I think, is by dark sky measures that we've talked about. So, yeah, let's do it.
Can I add to that a little bit? If I may? So when the advisory committee took this up, the recommendation that was made was to refer this article back to the planning board because we were concerned that some of the timeframes that Nicole spoke about exceeded what dark skies recommends. So, for example, it was permitting lighting until midnight, whereas dark skies suggests that light should be shut off earlier than that. So it's certainly going to be an improvement, but I don't think it will likely reach Wellesley's standard, but we're moving in that direction.
Elisa, come on up.
So this sort of reminds me of the question about the SGARs in the sense that, you know, light doesn't really know a boundary. But is this, and I've heard, I think, in some of the discussions about the lighting warrant article, that we will never really get to true dark skies because we're next to Boston. But is this change, if in a similar manner as the SGAR home rule petitions, if enough neighboring communities make a change, like would that possibly push the state, I don't know if anyone knows the answer to this, but to adopt something that would, you know, have broader coverage?
So Cynthia Cream, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, introduced legislation to do this sort of thing on public lands. And it's made some progress in that period of time, but it's still languishing in some committee or another. So, yeah.
Kathy, come on up.
I just wanted to ask you why we're going just for residential and not for residential and commercial and mixed. Like, why aren't we trying to do this across Brookline?
That's a very good question, and Nicole might have an answer. But I think part of the explanation is that there's different lighting regulations established for the area that's being developed as part of the MBTA effort. And so the thought was that it would be easier to focus on residential, learn some lessons from the other effort, and then come back together and be more comprehensive.
So the long-term goal is to do all of Brookline.
Yes.
Yeah, Nicole didn't mention it. Can I speak from here?
Well, come on, so the recording picks up your voice.
Nicole didn't mention it in her presentation, but the intention of this article is to act as a pilot for commercial property in the future. So there is a plan for that.
Wendy, come on up.
Thank you, Wendy Mockmuller. I don't know, this might have been a question for Nicole, but maybe Jocelyn has the answer. About the permit process for the dark skies. So I can see if there's, I know building department would enforce it, so does that mean the building department would be in charge of the permit process for this, or would it be the planning department since they're sponsoring the warrant article? So new construction, I can see that would probably go through the building department, but let's say someone's just doing a landscape renovation for their personal property. How would they, because I don't think there's a permit process for that.
No, so
right
the
now.
genesis of this bylaw, as I believe you heard, is a number of residents complained to the planning department about lighting glare and intrusive lighting and so forth. And so this was the planning department's response. So to answer your question, it's a zoning bylaw, right? Which was one of the concerns that the advisory committee had, because zoning bylaws only apply prospectively. They don't apply retroactively, which is why the whole question of a general bylaw came up. So with general lighting, it too would be complaint driven, right? So if someone puts up a lighting that doesn't work under this bylaw, it would be up to a complaint for enforcement to take place. But otherwise, it would be related to construction because it's a zoning bylaw and the building permit process. Does that answer your question?
It does, but I wonder, sorry, but I wonder if, if someone's doing a landscape project, let's say a homeowner wants to do the right thing but doesn't know about it, for example. Let's say I want to put in some, wayfinding lighting in my yard. I'm a renter, but anyway, but let's say I want to do that and I just I don't know about the parameters. So how would I, let's say as a homeowner, know these certain rules if I don't have to apply for a permit because it's not new construction? I would rather do the right thing from the beginning. And then instead of having a neighbor complain about it and then have to change everything, which would be cost prohibitive. So I just wonder, will there be an educational sort of component, if it passes, that they can let all people know that what the rules are?
Yeah, that would be a great question for Nicole. I imagine it would be treated like, any other zoning related bylaw. So, and, back to trees. When the tree bylaw that Richard spoke about was enacted 2 years ago, it was actually citizens who drafted the regulations, to help the Department of Public Works out, because we know that they're busy. So the citizens actually drafted both the rules and regulations, at least the original draft, and also the Q&A that has been tweaked somewhat but appears on the website. So similarly, there would be public awareness, through the town's social media or website with some help from citizens.
Just one point of clarification, with all due respect to the fine folks of Wellesley, I was talking about Wellfleet, Cape Cod, which truly has dark skies. Wellfleet, yes, yeah. Wellesley might be okay, but it's probably not Wellfleet. Yeah, big difference. That's it. Thanks. Oh, another question. Please come on up. We have another hour.
So this is in regards to protection of trees on commercial properties, and after finding out what Mr. Murphy said about the article that we have in place, the regulations we have in place from 2 years ago, there's a situation on Harvard Street. Harvard and I think it's Thorndike with the old Citizens Bank location where there are 3 older trees. I don't know what the diameters were that were removed. And so I don't know. So what has happened to that? Because they didn't have permission for that. And those 3 trees have been removed. And so are there any penalties for this? And what's happened? And can someone address that?
So the current bylaw only applies on residential property, and it's only tied to construction. So they were able to remove those 3 trees with without invoking the current tree bylaw. There's a separate bylaw in town that's a stormwater management bylaw that says that if you remove any number of trees who together add up to at least 32 inches in diameter, you have to have a stormwater management plan in place in order to do that. But that's the only requirement. You don't have to replace the trees or do anything else. It's just you have to make sure that you have to manage the stormwater. So the Warrant Article 16 would cover also commercial property. So had what we're proposing been in place, they would have had to get a permit and replant or pay into the tree fund, but currently there's no such requirement.
Anybody else? Are we done? Okay, well, thanks to the presenters and thanks to all of you for coming out. And this will be available on recording, as Dan said, probably Friday. If you want to share it with your constituents or your neighbors, it'll be up on the website, or where?
YouTube.
On YouTube, on the big website under the YouTube section. Okay, thanks for coming. Have a good night.
Thank you.